Welcome to this week's episode of The Pulse, Regen Strategic's political podcast. We're thrilled to be joined today by ex-Senator for Western Australia for the Liberal Party, David Johnston. Thank you for making the time available. And of course, I'm joined with my colleague Libby Lyons, Strategic Counsel at Regen Strategic. We're waiting for some of the dust to settle out of the federal election, but one thing that is emerging quite clearly is the Labor Party has been re-elected. Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister has got a thumping majority within the House of Representatives. Obviously, there's still, at time of recording, a number of seats to finalise with their count. So we don't quite know the personalities and the factional makeup of things. But no doubt it was an historic night. Libby, what were your initial reflections as you were watching those numbers come in?
Well, I was actually overwhelmed by the amazing result for Prime Minister Albanese and the Labor Party, and good on them, and I wish them all the very best. You know, there are 3 tough years ahead, I think, and we're going to need good, solid, sound government, and I wish them all the very best. I think it sent a very, very strong message to the Liberal Party. I think the Liberal Party, there'll be another review, and will it be another review that they just ignore and don't do anything with? I think they've got to reflect, review and act. And if they don't start acting, and if they don't start realising that they've got to engage women, they've got to engage the urban areas of Australia, and they've particularly got to engage with young people. And if they can't do that, then I fear for the future of the Liberal Party, to be frank.
Well, we'll get to some of that internal challenge the Liberal Party seemed to have nationally following the federal election. David, you've been a barrister, a senator for a long time, spent a lot of time listening to people. Did you get a sense of what was coming before Saturday?
Well, I think you'd have to be blind Freddy not to realise that the government was probably going to be returned. I think the end result and in its full swing was a bit of a surprise. Yeah. But, people were saying it could be a hung parliament. Well, at the end of the day, with the benefit of a little bit of hindsight, I think that it was always going to be the government in command in some shape or form. And that's played out, but it's played out to a degree I don't think many of us anticipated.
Yeah. I heard a number of Liberal supporters probably mentioned their preferred outcome was a majority in some form. The outcome they were most hesitant about seemed to be the prospect of a minority government, and I guess that continued contest within the House of Representatives in terms of legislation being passed on the day. I'm sure you heard the same thing, but hopefully this provides some certainty for the country going forward.
One of the things that I learnt a long time ago was when you have control of the lower house and the upper house, the Senate, it's very tempting to push through some legislation that ultimately comes around to bite you on the backside. Yep. In terms of electoral support. And whilst before 2007 we had some control of both houses, we did some things there, particularly with work choices and stuff that I think ultimately caused us a bit of grief electorally. So that the Prime Minister needs to be very careful that he has to manage the expectations of his supporters. Yeah. Because whilst the opposition is pretty irrelevant, given the result, it's very tempting to do things that ultimately cause a lot of unintended consequences, and ultimately, historically, when people look back at them, go, "Oh my goodness, we shouldn't have done that," and so it's an interesting task that the government has with such a majority to control the expectations. Now, thankfully, as I think we've virtually agreed, the minority parties and some of the elements of what they want to do are not going to be relevant to the government. but it will be tempting for the Labor Party to do certain things, which I think could evolve to be quite damaging for them.
Yeah.
Unless they're very careful.
Yeah. Libby, your thoughts on the temptation of a big majority in the lower house?
There will always be that temptation, and there will always be the argument that we have the mandate, and I get that. But I think that you do have to be very careful, because it's, as Jono said, these things can come back and bite you on the bum, with the electorate, and you end up out on your ear. And so, but I think that if we look at a steady as she goes approach, and they start implementing some of the promises that they told us all about, and follow through on those, then that will, they will be meeting the electorate's expectation. So, but it'll be a wait and see, and I think it will be a very interesting 3 years, and as I say, a very tough 3 years, I think.
Lots of headwinds globally, within the domestic economy. So there was lots of commentary around the reconnection to the public the Liberal Party need to make, redefining core values. But we're now 20 years on from John Howard's last federal election victory, in a very different world. What do you see as the core constituency for the Liberal Party? What are those values that it needs to find again?
Look, I really do think that John Howard created, and David, you know this better than I, because you were part of the cabinet and whatever, but he created, in his words, a broad church. And we have left that broad church behind, I think, particularly in the elected representatives that the Liberal Party have today. There is not a broad church. And I think that, again, as I say, and I have been banging on about this for the last decade, the Liberal Party have neglected women. They have neglected the young people, and all of a sudden at this election we had more young people voting than the boomers, and they have sent a really strong message to the Liberal Party in Australia today. You've got to start taking notice of us. You've got to start listening, and we have to start listening. And the other thing that we've forgotten about are the urban voters. So we need to start listening to people in urban areas. So those three groups, I think, and there are so many commentators saying the same thing. So I'm not on my Pat Malone here. It's got to be, if so many people are saying it, then there's got to be some truth to it. I don't know what you think, David.
Well, the dynamics of a party room are very, very interesting, and I was fortunate to be in the Parliament at a time when the Liberal Party in Western Australia particularly was at its highest in terms of federal seats and Senate representation. And what John Howard used to do, and Tony Abbott did it too, to a degree, members who had marginal seats would get up in the party room and everybody would be quiet and listen to what they had to say. And the reason they were marginal seat success stories was because they engaged the public and they knew what people were thinking and what was affecting people and what they didn't like. And I'm not sure that, and I haven't been in the party room for 10 years now, but I'm not sure we facilitate that listening to the members who are successful in what are very difficult seats to hang on to, but who are successful in doing that, so that when they get up in the party room, they need to be listened to. So, for instance, the contrast, as I often tell people, is Wilson Tuckey used to get up and call a spade a shovel, and Don Randall would get up and talk about, Cooden Up and what was happening in Armidale and things like that in Western Australia. And accordingly, John Howard and the whole party room would be deathly quiet, and we'd listen to what those guys had to tell us about regional Australia and about urban Australia. And I hope we're still doing that, but this result suggests to me that we are very focused on ideology. We're focused on economics far too much that is beyond people's comprehension. And I think we're just not relating to, as Libby says, women particularly. And I think, in the armed forces, I think we're striving to get women involved, particularly in Navy, and I think we're doing well. But that's the tip of not a good iceberg for us. Mining, I think, is leading the way with women, and it's doing really well. But there are a whole host of other industries that need to realise that 50% of the population is not being utilised to its maximum. And accordingly, we must facilitate female access to industry and to senior managerial roles. And that's a really important thing for the party room in the Liberal Party to come to terms with, because it's a boys' club.
Yeah, yeah. Said from perspective of
I've seen it firsthand. I mean, all of a lot of the CEOs that are talking to the Prime Minister are all male. I think there's a gender message coming to Canberra, and it's largely from men. And I think that the Liberal Party receives that message very, very well, and that potentially is the problem.
Right.
I mean, I think I said in one of the previous podcasts, the problem with the Liberal Party, it is the Liberal Party has lost middle-aged women and their daughters. And when you lose middle-aged women and their daughters, it's going to be very, very hard to get them back. And because if you speak to young women today, they feel there's no hope. There's not a lot of hope if they look at the policies that the Liberal Party presented.
No. Well, I think it'd be safe to say in a lot of the seats where women and their daughters are potentially voting, that cohort you're talking about, David, they're voting for a Teal candidate. Right. And they're seeing themselves in that Teal candidate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we just, as I say, the Liberal Party just can't seem to get that through their thick skulls. And I headed up the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. I pushed the stats out for all to see. You don't have to be a statistician to understand that in Australia today, still roughly 80% of all CEOs are still men. Now, the Labor Party have done a very good job at trying to level that playing field for women and men in terms of some of the legislation they've put in around the agency and expanding the data that's collected and whatever. But it's something that the Liberal Party just doesn't want to think about, doesn't want to hear. And if the Liberal Party goes on like this, I despair, actually. We are a country built on a two-party preferred system. Yeah. And, the Liberal Party must step up and take notice and start listening.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's not a position of ideology. It's, taking Jim Chalmers' language for the next term, it's probably an issue of productivity for the national economy, to be utilising every available joule of energy that we've got within the domestic economy, because we're going to need it.
Absolutely. But we also should be focusing on, as best we can, paying down our debt. Mm-hmm. What are we leaving our children and grandchildren if we don't start paying down debt? I mean, the Liberal Party was always the party of lower taxes. We didn't see any of that. Yeah. The economic policies, I think, that we put forward, I don't know what you think, David, but were woeful. Woeful. So is it little wonder that traditional Liberal Party voters turned their back?
Given what we've talked about, largely our domestic issues within the party room and the sort of lay party, was the impact of Trump in the end a little bit overblown, maybe used as a bit of an excuse?
No, I think it was a huge impact. I think the instability of our nearest and dearest ally in terms of the trade war with China in terms of the massive cuts to their public service that for a while looked like there was simply a shotgun approach. Mm-hmm. I think people were very, very upset and nervous by that approach. And, the president has a very, shall we say, interesting way of expressing himself about things. And I think there's a very large element of instability abroad when he seeks to execute policy very quickly. I think I can relate to a lot of what he wants to do, and I can see the benefit in trying to restart American manufacturing base and get it going again. But we've taken the cheap products from China for 30 years now, and it's a very, very big task that isn't going to happen overnight. And yet the White House is very keen to try and get it going very, very quickly. And I think a lot of people aren't going on the journey, if you follow me. Yes. And I think people in Australia looking over the fence at what's happening in America are quite concerned and frightened by it. We have, in defence and national security, a massive relationship with the United States. And it's been a very successful relationship, and it's been a security blanket for us because there's only 27 million of us. A line across California at Bakersfield, where everything south of that one line in one state, Los Angeles and San Diego, that's our size. Mm-hmm. And so with the Americans going through this transitional phase, I think a lot of Australians are very nervous. And of course, when the conservative side of politics seems to relate to the president, I think that's caused us a lot of grief.
Yeah. So the counter to that, and you've had some fairly storied comments about Australian sovereign manufacturing capability, is the Future Made in Australia, the related policies around domestic manufacturing right for the time in your mind?
Oh, absolutely. But we suffer a number of issues with that. Sure. So we're competing in the international world, and we're one of the great supporters of the international trading obligations, the free trade agreements we have with countries, and that's fine. But cents per kilowatt hour is what's killing us, right? So that we are paying 27 in the eastern states, beyond 35 cents a kilowatt hour. Yeah. In China and Southeast Asia, they're paying 5, 10, 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Mm. It's very difficult for us to do things when they have a 30 or 40% advantage in their cost structure. Yeah. And often in China, with great respect to them, water and some electricity is intensely subsidised. Yeah. I used to be, once upon a time, when I wore a younger man's clothes, in charge of anti-dumping. Yep. And when we could get accountants from Hong Kong into China to have a look at what was going on with some of the products that were extremely cheap into Australia, if we were allowed to send them in, we found that there was subsidisation, so that the playing field was not level. Yeah. Now, from our point of view, getting back to buying Australian goods is a very positive thing, but we must realise that there's probably some cost issues involved with that. I think ILO requirements in China are very flexible, shall we say. Mm-hmm. I'm being as diplomatic as I can.
I can tell you are. Yeah. Crossing your fingers behind your back.
Yeah. And so it's a big task for us. But our knitting, if we're going to stick to it, is mining, oil and gas, right? And agriculture. The fact that there are tariffs on, as a tariff war raging against American product out of China, which is the world's biggest market, will be, and the price of lamb has gone up substantially in the last 2 weeks. That is because the Chinese are saying we're not buying American, we're looking around, and the best and cheapest quality, highest quality, cheapest price is Australia. And I think there's a little bit of a silver lining. I'm not sounding too optimistic here, but a silver lining for us in agriculture with the markets in East Asia. I mean, the South Koreans and the Japanese are suffering the same issue. So this is the sort of thing that is disturbing Australians. Japan's a great ally of the United States and us. South Korea had at one stage 70,000 troops from America in it. It probably has 20 or 30 or 40,000 there now. these are things that I'm not sure the president has factored into this internationally wide tariff stance of his. And accordingly, I think, we could benefit substantially in agriculture with respect to his perspective, but that remains to be seen. The instability is the thing that I think was at play most on Saturday.
I think, David, the other thing that we've got to mention in terms of manufacturing here is we will never compete on wages. Our wages are far too high. So you've got, not only have you got, the kilowatt hours being 3 and 4 times, 3 and 4 times the amount of other places, but our wages are over the top.
But we have a problem with wages in that our costs are so high. So that, let's take local government rates. I mean, $2,000 and $3,000 every year for families to have to find just to be a member of a municipality. I mean, when was the last time you heard of a municipality lowering its rate charges? It just keeps going up and up and up. And so the cost structure means that the wages have to meet those requirements. So we're locked into a cycle. High wages that the mining industry is paying, I think, is just wonderful. And Western Australia has been very, very fortunate in our FIFO operations and things going ahead. Oil and gas and mining have put a lot of food and savings into families in Western Australia. We're blessed. But in Victoria, it's a different story. Tasmania South Australia is a different story. So we've got to relate to the costs of things driving wages. You can't sort of slash wages whilst costs are up. So we're locked into that cycle.
That's right.
The secret is getting the costs down. That's the most important thing. And electricity is one of the major drivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is politics harder now?
Well, I think it's more diverse. I think people who have diverse interests have a much bigger voice. Yeah. I think that's not a bad thing, but it makes politics a little more difficult. People have to be much more broadly focused. It's not just about economics. It's about social structure, social fabric, and the environment. And you have to be, a politician these days has to know about electricity, oil, gas, environment, global warming, greenhouse gases, emissions, all of that sort of stuff. So in my day, we sort of knew about it, and that's only 10 years ago. I sound as if I'm about 95, but the point is, I think it was a little bit easier then. I think you're right. It's a little more complex now, and I think the public is much more into the data. They're into the detail. They're slowly but surely coming to terms with important ingredients of all of the arguments on all of the subjects.
Yeah, yeah. And choosing where you're pitching that message
that's
to
right.
is
that's right.
Is
and you've got to be very, very careful, and you've got to understand what people want to nod to, right? Nodding is what, whenever I got up in front of an audience, I want them nodding, right? Mm-hmm. Now, at the moment, the Liberals are not getting too many nods.
No, nodding off.
nodding off or getting an angry look back.
Yeah. Well, that seemed to be part of the issue with, energy policies. There was I think, universally accepted to be quite a complex transition to nuclear power that was proposed by the Liberal Party that seemed to be hamstringing them from the get-go.
It's a very interesting subject. I mean, I'm a huge believer in nuclear power. Argentina has 3 reactors. Belgium has 6. These countries around the world have all got very cheap and viable electricity. A Virginia-class submarine has 30 megawatts. It can stay under the water for 30 years. It only comes to the surface for food and vitamin D. So nuclear power is and there's no emissions, by the way. Nuclear power is quite amazing. But we needed to take people along the journey with us. The secret in politics is you say, let's have the conversation. I don't think you can say to the public in Australia, here are 7 sites, this is where we're going to put them. I don't think you can do that. As much as I personally think that's great. I must confess I'm a huge fan of nuclear power. Right. But the public have not grown up with that industry. The public have not experienced what is required in that industry. We have no technicians. And we're going through this with AUKUS right now.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. I mean, would Argentina would a country with existing nuclear capacity start from scratch, A, and B, with the renewable potential that Australia has?
So South Australia had a Royal Commission into nuclear energy some long time ago, but it sort of got shut down because I think the federal branch of the Labor Party said we don't want that. Right? It's a discriminator between us and the Conservatives. But I think the sad fact is that it looks like that subject is politically damaged. The really important thing to consider is that we're the only top 20 economy in the world that doesn't have nuclear energy, and that our cost structure, I mean, Gippsland Coal provided the manufacturing base for Victoria. So they were on 10, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Okay, we can't have coal anymore. We all acknowledge that. But the replacement is 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Our manufacturing base is just shredded on that basis. Nuclear power, where we have Western Australia with the most uranium reserves in the world, right? Rudall River, Yeelirrie, etc. We have the most. And it's close to the surface and it's really cheap. And so bottom line is we should have had a better discussion over time on the nuclear issue such that all of the things could be discussed without the pressure of an election coming over the horizon. Yeah. I think an electoral cycle discussing things of major political and policy deviation and turning, it's not to be had in the face of an election. It's to be had quietly over time with reports done so that people can digest it and you can point to the facts and people can read things slowly and surely and come to terms with things.
So it might not, no one was committing to it on the day after the election in terms of what was going to be on or off the table for a future policy platform from opposition, but you think it might be
I think the Conservatives are pretty scarred with that policy. I'm not sure whether it will be retained, but it strikes me that the most digestible expression was we want to discuss having nuclear energy in the mix. I think that's as far as we can go at this point in time until there's some broad consensus that is a viable option. And the costs are not the big numbers that scare everybody to pieces.
So not $600 billion.
Well, no, but and bear in mind that whatever alternative you want to coal and gas is going to be extraordinarily expensive. It's going to be, 7, 8, 9 digits, right? And accordingly, we've just got to let people know that 40 cents a kilowatt hour is killing a lot of business. It's damaging households, and the environment is a war zone of wind turbines in the ocean. I mean, people are saying we don't want to look out off the beach and see a whole lot of spinning propellers. And farmers are saying we don't want to sacrifice a lot of arable land to solar farms. So we've got this debate raging on the renewable side. And, of course, we've got the cost of alternatives. Yeah. Now, it's a very serious discussion that needs to be had with the objective being affordable electricity. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that objective is achievable, but people need to understand what is involved in having 10, 15, 20 cents a kilowatt hour. It's not easy.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like both parties or both sides of politics are going to be taking the public on some different journeys.
Well, I think that's the first thing. What is the cheapest and best, most efficient, non-emitting energy production system that people can have and understand and say, that's what we want?
The key word here too is reliable.
Reliable.
Yeah.
12 hours a day, there's no sunshine.
Yeah. But in a 3-year election cycle, if it's not politically palatable, you can...
The first thing is what is received well in the electorate, right?
But you go back to the GST debate, that took a couple of election cycles.
Yeah.
Electoral cycles.
Well, Paul Keating won the GST.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and Pearson and the birthday cake.
Exactly.
It was 8 years before it came in.
Right.
Precisely.
So I think the one thing we can say is perhaps we started that debate. Perhaps we started
I think that's right. We've started it, but we dived in headlong into the shallow end. And I think we need to just sit back and try and let people do some homework. I mean, the head of the Greens in Europe came out to Australia and he's pro-nuclear. He says we can't get to 2050, 2050 emissions without nuclear. And I think there's a lot in what he says.
I think it's we've got to have the sensible, mature debate with the facts laid out in front of us, and there's a lot of work to do to get those facts laid out in front of us, so that that is also palatable, but not just palatable, but that people can understand, because people don't understand a lot about electricity. And I used to work for Western Power. It's a tricky thing to understand. So there's a lot of work that can be done, and I think we should be doing it because I think it has to be part of the mix going forward.
Yeah.
So we do about 500 megawatts of rooftop solar in WA.
Yes.
The problem with that is that the grid has to be maintained at 50 hertz for all of those buffs out there that understand electricity. It's great to have the solar, but you really do need batteries, and batteries are expensive. But the 50 hertz to be maintained and to receive 500 megawatts on a hot day from solar, it is a major problem for Synergy. Right? And it actually costs money to have that 500 megawatts. So it's not, as Libby says, it's not an easy understand to know what is happening with the WEM, which is the Western Electricity Market, or the NEM, which is the National Electricity Market, right? And that's Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and sometimes Tasmania. Yeah. I mean, there's tens of thousands of megawatts in each one.
You forgot the Victorian.
Victoria, yes, Melbourne. Did I say Melbourne? I say Melbourne? Oh, sorry, Melbourne. Yeah, Melbourne. I'm inclined to forget Melbourne a bit.
Yeah. If you had one more day in the Senate, what would be, and you had your magic wand, what would be something you'd look to push through?
Well, the thing that I spent most of my time doing when I had the checkbook, so to speak, was to get defence spending to 2% of GDP. I think that needs to be raised certainly to 3.5%, and I think the battle with Treasury and Finance that I had with that was one that ultimately the Prime Minister supported me in, and that's why we got 2% of GDP. But that is the Canberra bubble is all about talking the talk but not necessarily walking the walk. And so we're talking big numbers for AUKUS, we're talking big numbers for a whole host of projects, but getting Treasury and Finance to commit in the forward estimates to those dollars. And if you look at what Defence has had recently, the last 3 years, Defence has gone nowhere in terms of money. Now, that is a significant problem for us because with Defence, you either have it or you don't. Now, a lot of countries, New Zealand has some Defence, but not much, and it's not a huge burden for them. But us, with 10.5 million square kilometres to look after, with 27 million people, it's a huge task for us. You either are in it or you're not. Now, we are very good with intelligence, reconnaissance and surveillance, ISR, and we spend a lot of money on that area, but we're going into space, we're going into satellites, we're going into submarines, we're going into naval vessels. This requires money on the table. Money on the table. Now, this is something that the Cabinet and the Prime Minister are going to have to deal with because on my side of the argument, we deal with it. It's pretty straightforward for us. But on his side of the argument, the Labor Party are often very reluctant because they have other priorities. And so I'm concerned that if our trade routes were blockaded through some sort of activity in the Northwestern Pacific, we pay the bills in Western Australia. If we can't continue to pay the bills with gas, minerals and oil, Australia's in very dire economic straits.
Yeah. So would that be your argument around the impact to debt? We were talking before about the impacts of energy transformation on the budget bottom line or the balance sheet. your argument would be preserving our economic potential.
We have a lot of things that a lot of people want, right? And we need to protect them. To have one small regiment between Perth and Darwin with trillions of dollars worth of investment, no other country in the world would do that, but we do it. Right? The Pilbara Regiment, a great little group of people who are dedicated and hardworking and fabulous and do a wonderful job, but they're tiny. That's all we got. Now, many people will criticise me for saying that, but, nowhere in the world would the oil and gas repositories, the Burrup Peninsula, Gorgon, Wheatstone, Hamersley Iron, Rio Tinto, BHP, Mineral Resources, all of that infrastructure left with no actual real-time protection. Yeah. It's quite staggering. And indeed, the strategic review that Stephen Smith and Angus Houston did set that out and said, this is what you need to do. And nothing's happened. Great respect to the government. They'll argue that point, but, I'm telling you now, I don't think anything's happened.
Yeah. Peter Dutton on election night in his concession speech as leader, but also member for Dixon, he made direct reference to his fondness as being Minister of Defence. It seemed to be a genuine highlight. Can you recognise and understand that as someone who held that role as well?
The reason that myself and many others are attracted to the defence is not because of the department, but because of the personnel. The people who dedicate their lives to the service of their country through many, many years. And thankfully you didn't see me sitting in fighter jets or driving tanks or anything like that. If I did do that, there was never any media there. But I enjoyed my time with them. I was opposition spokesman for about 4 or 5 years, and may I say, I still have a lot of close friends from that time, and I work with them to try and do things. And I'm chairman of the University of Western Australia's Defence and Security Institute. I still work with a lot of those people to promote the individual services, particularly for women, right? And to try and keep recruitment as a viable option for kids leaving university and or high school. We've got some fabulous capability out there in the services, and giving them a trade that after 5 years or 10 years, the industry will soak them up faster than you can say Jack Robinson, because they have wonderful skills. And it's a great thing for Australia to do. We have a proud heritage of military achievement from a very small, low base, right? And so naturally I was attracted to the Defence Department, and it has a language all of its own in acronyms. And I learnt the language, to say, without sounding too conceited, I learnt the language to be able to speak about what the protected tactical data links are, what vessels we have, their capability, what we need to get, and so on and so forth. And that was what, I've had 3 nights on a Collins-class submarine at 100 metres, and that's one of my life's highlights.
Right.
And so, defence is just a natural thing for me to want to enhance and improve.
Not for you, Libby?
Oh, anything. I couldn't bear. It's like being underground in a mine.
Right.
Whilst they're massive, I get terribly claustrophobic.
Leave it for the submariners.
So
thankfully, I've been in a lot of mines and I don't get claustrophobic.
No, well, and for a time, my son touted, sort of thought that he might like to be a submariner. Well, goodness me, I talked him out of that pretty quickly.
Oh, you should have told me. I would have talked him into it.
Oh, no, I couldn't bear it for the poor.
So we've talked about service. You've done a great service to us today. Thank you for coming in.
Great pleasure.
No, really, really do appreciate it. Libby will continue to stay close to cabinet appointments, a return to federal parliament, additional sittings for state parliament. There's a real settling going on with this quick succession of elections, but we'll keep an eye on the pulse as always.
I think the general public are breathing a huge sigh of relief. I think in Western Australia, it was just too much. Really, you speak to people, it was too much.
Totally.
Too much.
Jam-packed schedule.
Whew.
Well, we can put away the pencils for a few years and
get back to
work. That's right.
And get back to normal life.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Beck.
No. Thank you.
Well done.